Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down below this video, and I pick from those each week. And there's always like 100+ questions, and I usually pick 20 some, so don't be offended if I'm not picking your question. It's not on purpose. It's just, there's just a lot of questions that get asked every week. So, and I appreciate your guys' participation, because without you, there's not a question and answer video. Holly is back here. You might be able to see her. She's back there sniffing something. I don't know what she's doing right this second, but she is out here with me. I'll probably have to put her in at some point. It's a little hot this morning as I'm filming this. I'm putting up a video on foundation plants over on the Learn to Garden video series, which is on my website. So those of you who have purchased the Learn to Garden video series, you'll get an email saying that video is going up either as you're watching this Q&A on Sunday or Monday, one or the other. And I've got several other tree perennials, picking plant videos coming up for that series there. I've been putting up these before and after gardening photos that you guys have been sending me. I've gotten over 200 emails, which is amazing. Beautiful garden transformations that you guys have sent me. So thank you very much for participating in that. There's already 4 videos from that, and I haven't put a dent in the emails yet. So if you're interested in sending in before and after photos, send them to this email address, horttube@gmail.com. Give me some information about the zone you're in. I'll only mention your first name and maybe the city that you're in or the zone that you're in. Nothing else. I won't, identify you. And also, if you're out there taking new photos, if you'll turn your phone sideways and shoot them in wide angle, because YouTube is a wide angle format where Instagram is the other direction. So anyway, take them wide angle if you can, because that'll show off your garden the best on the videos. If I sat here and counted the number of bumblebees behind me, I'm sure there's 50 just right here in this little frame behind me. I don't think you guys will be able to see it, but there's so many bumblebees back here. Let's see. So somebody asked, is it possible to force every shade plant into the sun by covering their roots? Because I have talked about some plants have shallow root systems and just don't want to be, have the sun beating down on their roots. So as you're driving along the interstate, you'll see dogwoods and redbuds kind of leaning out of the woodland edge. So they've got their roots tucked into the woods, and then they're trying to get sun on the top. Vines are like that. Vines germinate down at the bottom of a tree somewhere and then climb the tree to get in as much sun as possible, but their roots are down in the ground, down under the tree canopy, nice and cool. A lot of our ericaceous plants like blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, of course azaleas are rhododendrons, pieris, a lot of those plants have very shallow fibrous root systems that are up near the surface. And a lot of those plants, if you're planting them close or having things grow around them, can take a lot more sun than I think we think they can take. But there are plants that cannot be forced out into the sun, and a lot of those are going to have very large leaves. They've evolved a large leaf to collect reflective light in a woodland space. So that big leaf is there to try to collect, that leaves are just solar panels, right? And so some of them are really big in order to collect light. Now, with some exception to that, bananas can take full sun and they have giant leaves. But for the most part, a lot of our larger tropical foliage looking plants, have evolved to just collect a lot of reflective light. And if you take those and too much sun, they're likely going to burn. So no, not every plant, but there are a lot of plants that can take a lot more sun than we think. You just have to plant a little more dense for that. I have a very humid morning going, and the lens is fogging up occasionally here. Somebody asked when to do cilantro seeding in zone 7 for the fall. So where I'm at here in Raleigh. Cilantro is definitely going to be a spring crop and a fall crop here. It's just too hot during the summer. It'll bolt and seed itself. So you could start those seeds now inside if you wanted to, and then plant them outside once it's cooler, or you can direct seed them outside, once the soil temperature's, a little bit cooler than it is now. So sometime in October, beginning of October, mid to late September is when you'd put those plants in the ground if you wanted to go ahead. But again, you can go ahead and start the seed now. So that's typically what I'll do. Toward the end of August, I'll start the seed. It'll take 3 or 4 weeks under the light inside. And then by the time I transition them out, hopefully the nights are cooler and they don't bolt right away. And hopefully it stays warm enough through October that I can get a lot of growth out of them, because cilantro goes very quick with cool nights and kind of warm days, mild days during the fall. So somebody's planting some things in dry shade around tree roots. They're on a large lot and they're not going to be able to water them, and they're thinking about, or they've tried Loropetalum, Acuba, camellias, probably, and they just don't have any access to water in that space. I think that the main thing you need to do is fall plant, number one, so that you can hopefully get some roots under some things. Don't plant marginal things in the fall, and I've got another question about that coming up. But fall planting is going to be super, super helpful if you've got a spot where you know that the summertime is going to be very difficult for you to water. So you give it the longest window possible to get established before the severe heat comes back around. So I think that would be important, to plant things that are cold hardy enough to survive the winter being fall planted, and then giving them enough time to root in before then. But that is difficult, conditions. And Acuba will definitely take dry shade. They don't even like, definitely don't like wet feet really. Camellias are absolutely fantastic in dry shade, but again, you got to get things established. And so there might be some, I would fall plant them, but there's got to be some reasonable amount of, if you have a dry spring or something like that, that you're going to have to figure out a way to get water to them. Otherwise, you're going to continue to struggle with this. But some of the best camellias I ever see are on old abandoned farmhouses where they haven't been watered in years, but somebody got it established initially, right? At the time somebody was living in that house. So somebody was they're asking about planting. I always talk about planting high in clay-based soils because, we can drown things. There's not a lot of air down in that soil. When you dig a hole in clay, you're basically digging a clay pot down in the ground, and when you plant a plant in it that's grown in bark, basically, all the water is going to easily fall through that bark down to the bottom of that hole that you've dug. So it's going to be potentially, if you planted something and then it rained a whole lot afterwards, that's the easiest access for the water to get into the ground, is that hole that you dug. So I always talk about planting things up a little higher in the clay, just for, it helps. But they were asking whether they should plant elephant ears or colocasia deeper because they like wetter feet. It's a great question, but see, you still have the same problem in clay-based soils where it's just not going to drain. It's an air-related issue just as much as it is a moisture-related issue. So I would still plant a little bit higher than I would in sandy soils. Although, I go down to Louisiana and you see the colocacias and things growing, and the alocasias growing in ditches, virtually in water, but it's a very different soil type that those things are growing in. So I still plant everything up just a hair higher than I would other places. They're still going under the ground, but just a hair higher than I would any other type of soil. Plus, the other thing is, most of those things are choosing to grow on kind of the banks and then putting their toes down in the water, and they're not necessarily directly, setting themselves in the water. They're sitting themselves along the edge and then reaching down for the water. I get a lot of Hydrangea paniculata questions this time of year. Somebody has a limelight hydrangea that's leaning slightly. Should they continue to stake it? I guess it's a tree form or single trunk one. I've got one leaning back here too. Now, it's not a limelight, but it is a Hydrangea paniculata. Yeah, I think you'll probably need to continue to stake it. The problem is, if it has a thin caliper and it's on a lean, those big heavy flowers that limelight gets could potentially pull it the rest of the way over sometime in the future if all the flowers are kind of leaning one direction. So I'd probably try to ultimately keep it pretty straight, and I'd also try to hold the top of that plant back some, cut it pretty hard in the late winter, the top part of it, so you can thicken up that trunk as much as possible. But I'd stake it for this winter, cut it back in late winter, and hopefully thicken up the trunk enough where it can stand up straight on its own. Okay. Somebody asked, is there a difference between heat tolerance and humidity tolerance? Oh yeah, definitely. There are a lot of plants in the desert Southwest that are adapted to extremely hot, low humidity conditions, and don't like our humid conditions here in the Southeast, or the fact that some of the places in the southeast can get 65, 70 inches of rain during the year. And then there's plants that absolutely evolved in, there's a lot of temperate plants that we use, a lot of Asian temperate plants that we use. You know, azaleas would fall, you know, Japanese azaleas would fall into that category. Just actually a ton of Asian shrubs that would probably really not like to be in extremely dry air conditions in the southwest, because again, they just evolved in humid areas, and they can open their stomata and actually take in water through the air, and that's not an option, you know, in a very dry place. But that doesn't mean all plants in the desert Southwest won't come east. A lot of what happens with where plants are native is that they just got cut off from other things. I think, you know, Arizona cypress is a great example. If you go to Arizona and see Arizona cypresses, you know, in places where it's 110 degrees and it's, you know, terribly dry air, or really, really dry air, they're diminutive kind of, you know, funky things. And then you bring them east and put them in the humidity, you know, like Carolina sapphire is a great example of it. I mean, it just grows 50 feet tall, and it's so thick, and and it's just amazing. You know, that, I think it's just a plant that got cut off some way. A mountain range formed in between it and other places. You know, whatever happened. You know, it would prefer to actually be over here than over there. And it just got cut off somehow. So it doesn't mean that all plants that are over there won't grow over here, and all plants over here that won't grow over there. But it does mean that there are plants out there that would not like to be in our humid conditions in the southeast, and there are plants that need humidity in the air that wouldn't do well over there as well. So yes, there is a difference. Probably a lot of words there. Let's see. Somebody has 3 ruby loropetalum that were damaged by the cold. And they're coming back green. Get a lot of loropetalum or green questions in the summer heat. So any stress that your loropetalum goes under, the purple foliage loropetalums, and honestly, purple foliage weigela, it doesn't matter. A lot of these purple foliage plants will green, even barberries and things like that, during really, really hot summers. You've obviously added some winter damage from last year to that. So you've doubled down on the stress. Plus, I talked about a few weeks ago, again, this is another one of those shading the roots questions. When I see loropetalum planted 3-4 feet apart in commercial settings, they're green this time of year where the sun is just beating down on them, whereas the ones have kind of filled in and the roots are shaded a bit seem to hold their purple color through the summer just a little bit better. Let's see. So somebody asked, how much is too much sun on a Hydrangea macrophylla here in Raleigh? So I'm in zone 7B. Hydrangea macrophyllas are really difficult to find the space for, because if you put them in too much shade here in our area, they will stretch on you, and you'll just get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 flowers, and they'll just be held out, you know, like this, away from the plant, right? And not look all that great. If you put them in too much sun, they wilt every afternoon and just look like, you know, you're killing them. So it's very difficult. I put them, you know, I think almost everybody watching who's in zone 7B, 8A, and you're trying to grow Hydrangea macrophyllas, you know, the big old blue or pink or, you know, traditional looking, French hydrangeas, you're going to have to experiment with them a little bit. In terms of where to grow them. You're going to put them in places that are a little too shady and they're going to stretch. You're going to put them in a place that's a little too sunny and they're going to wilt way too much. A little wilting is fine. And a lot of times the plant's not necessarily dry. It's just kind of going, I'm going to get the angle of the leaf down a bit so that the sun's not directly on it. And then as soon as the sun goes down, they perk back up. But there is a delicate balance. We do need direct sun on them at least part of the day, and we prefer to get some morning sun on them because, again, in this humidity, which was fogging my glass up, when I first started the video, we tend to get a little bit more Cercospora leaf spot on them. And so getting the leaves dried out in the morning is probably helpful with that a bit. So I want to get enough morning light on them for sure, and I don't mind having them in the sun till about probably 12 or 1, and then I'd have late day sun on them, which is basically how I have one right over here that I'm looking at that's still blooming, my Dear Dolores. It goes in the shade about 1:30, and it's in the sun it's starting, the sun's starting to hit it now. The sun's about to come over the house and hit it. And that's, what time is it? So that's things in the shed, in the sun from about 8:30 in the morning until about 1:30 in the afternoon. It wilts a little bit in the afternoon, but not too bad. 2 months, somebody has a 2-month-old Clayera that's losing lots of leaves. They bought them at the box store on sale or something. I don't remember the rest of the question. You know, and then want to know what's going on with them. If it's losing the old interior foliage, almost certainly it got dry at some point. That could have happened, you know, at the store before you bought them. It could have happened since you've had them in the ground. There was a lot of root competition around them too. I think I seem to remember from this question. If it's interior foliage, likely they were dry. If you're seeing weird growth in the new foliage and some of the new foliage having real struggles, sometimes that can be overwatering as one way to identify it. Typically, if I'm seeing problems in the new foliage, I figure I'm overwatering it and it's having some nutrient related issue because the roots have been damaged and it can't bring up anything to the top of the plant. Interior thinning is, again, typically dry. I don't know when it got dry. You could tell me that you've been watering it just fine for the last 4 weeks, but it could have been, you know, happened beforehand and it's just taken a while to show up in the plant. So I don't think they'll die. You know, you can, typically what I'll do on a plant like that is I'll just walk away from it, take a break, don't think about it, water it if it needs water, but take a break from it. It's not going to need as much water anymore either. You can, you know, I've said this before, you know, when a plant loses, the plant lost half its leaves because it didn't have enough water in order to balance itself. Well, now it's balanced. If you now throw water at it like it has every leaf, you have the potential to overwater it. Okay, you can take, you know, the plant kind of solved its own problem. So water it if it's dry, but otherwise walk away from it. Next year, when it starts to put on new growth in April or May, and you see it's transitioned okay and it's starting to put on new growth, you can give it a light haircut and that will force some of that new growth down in the middle. But in the meantime, walk away from it and try not to overwater it, you know, and do more damage to it. Okay, so somebody here in Zone 7B where I'm at, they want to plant some white wedding hydrangeas, loropetalum, sunshine ligustrum, and they want to know if they should fall plant them. Fall, again, we've always done this fall is for planting thing here, which I've said in the past was partly designed to make sure people understood that we're moving to the south. I mean, we had a lot of people moving from, you know, initially here in Raleigh, it was a lot of folks from IBM and New York area that moved down here. And then, you know, basically Raleigh became kind of Silicon Valley East, and all these people are flooding in here and they didn't necessarily know we could garden in the fall. And it's just not something from the areas they were coming from. So we created this fall is for planting campaign. And then it became in some people's mind, fall is the only time of year to plant. And I think kind of backfired a bit, but it was more just to say you can garden in the fall here. But I'm still a little bit cautious, having landscaped for all those years and had to guarantee plants, that I would see some things that I planted in fall. And I've talked about grasses being one of those things. You know, if I'm planting grasses that were on their way to going dormant in October, they're less likely to come back, you know, that following spring. Whereas if I planted them in the spring, they were quite vigorous through the summer, got themselves established, went to sleep, and had no problem coming back that next year. So I did observe some things, and then super marginal things. Like if I was on the very edge of where that plant would do well, like you know, I've got a Fatsia japonica over here that's really zone 8 to 10, and I'm in 7B, and I see them in 7B, so I know they'll grow here. That's another one I'm spring plant, get it established, make sure it goes into its first winter fully rooted in and ready to put up a fight for that winter. So to answer your question, white wedding hydrangeas, that's Hydrangea paniculatas, they're zone 4 hardy. So you're not gonna have any problem planting that thing in zone 7B in the fall. None at all. You're not even, almost nobody, everybody can plant Hydrangea paniculatas in the fall as long as you can dig a hole. Loropetalums, this is one that's probably, you know, we always say zone 7 to 10, but I think people over in Tennessee would tell you that their zone 7 is probably not the place where loropetalum always survived the winter. They're really probably more like zone 7B to 10 to never have, you know, to not have any problems. So that one's one that I might spring plant, you know, just because you're on the edge of it. You can decide the space too in your garden. Is it kind of a more protected space where that winter probably wouldn't cause it a problem anyway? There's no wind that's going to blow across it. You know, then you'd go ahead and plant it. That was the one in the list that's the closest to being marginal in your area, right? And then Sunshine Ligustrum is zone 6 to 10. You're in zone 7B. Heck yeah, I'm putting that thing in the ground and I'm not going to worry about it. Even if it gets a little bit of damage in the winter, it'll flush right back out the following spring. So it's a plant by plant thing for me. And also the one other thing I'm looking at in my fall planting is I don't want a lot of new growth on them. So when I go to the garden center and I'm buying plants in October, end of September and October, which is again a great time to plant non-marginal things, I'm also looking and making sure that I'm not putting something that's in full new growth on it. Like it came out of a greenhouse, came from some other part of the country, and it's just full of new growth that hasn't hardened off yet. And you guys can tell the difference between, you know, something that's, you know, tender new growth and then growth that happened earlier in the year and it's hardening off. You know, I just want the plant to have gone to sleep like it's supposed to have gone to sleep, right? That's how it should look. And then you won't have any problem with them. Okay. So somebody asked the safest way to raise soil pH around planted shrubs and trees. And the reason I wrote this one down, I mean, obviously you can lime, you know, you can throw lime around, you know, around the garden, you know, if you need to raise the soil pH. So you can use powdered lime or pellet lime or whatever you want to do, or you can use the the faster working limes, the calcium-based limes, fast acting limes. The reason I wrote this question down though is why. I don't know, you know, I don't know what your soil pH is. I didn't get any information about that, but almost every shrub that's in this garden out here are things that would like the pH a little bit low. So my pH here, when I originally tested it, was about 5.8. I think 6.5 is probably optimum, but when I say something like that, I'm always worried that people will chase 6.5. 5.8 is perfectly fine. 6.9 I would have probably been okay with too. I'm not as happy with on the other side of 6.5 as I am below it. But you know, if you're in that window of probably 5.5 to 7, almost all nutrients are going to be available to your plants, and there's probably no reason to be out chasing it. So that's what I would ask myself. You know, you're never going to find perfection in your soil nutrients or your pH. You're never going to get that perfect, and you're not row crop farmers. You're not trying to get 200 bushels of corn or 250 bushels of corn per acre. You know, you're just hoping that your plants have enough phosphorus that they don't end up with, off-colored leaves, you know, from a phosphorus deficiency. But you know, most of us aren't. Be careful trying to chase perfection in your soil, because you can go too far one way or the other. And it takes a while. So all the things that you would be adding, if you're adding phosphorus, you're adding nitrogen is quick, but you know, most of the forms of phosphorus we throw out are probably going to take a little time to get into an available form to be used. Calcium, magnesium, whatever it is, changing your soil pH with sulfur or lime, and changing your pH is normally a little futile, because if you use sulfur to lower your pH, it may initially lower it, but if you continue to test your pH, you'll see your pH, start to come back up pretty quickly over time. It's something, it will always try to go back to where it was. You haven't really changed your soil. So anyway, I wrote that question down just to say why. What is it about your soil? Is your soil, if your pH was like 4.5? Maybe at that point, I would be trying to, lime it. My old house, I did lime there in a video a long time ago, but my pH was like 4.8. It was extremely low, and which is fine for azaleas and blueberries and a lot of plants. There's actually a lot of plants that don't mind that low of a pH, but be careful trying to chase perfection in your soil. You get a soil test and it comes back and it says you need a little bit of phosphorus, you need a little bit of this, you need a little bit of that. If your pH is in between about 5.7 and 6.8 or 9, and you have moderate amount of all the macro and most of the micronutrients, you're probably fine without getting in there and going, I'm going to chase perfection. Again, because we're not row crop farmers. the sun's starting to invade me back here in the back garden. And again, this back garden gets full sun from about, 8:30 in the morning until about 2, and then that tree, the big giant oak takes over back there. Somebody asked, can you save grass clippings for anything? So they're bagging their grass clippings and want to know if they can use it. You can absolutely put it in a compost bin. That green material from your grass is great for a compost bin. You need a combination of green things, that are kind of alive, and then brown things like leaves and twigs and things like that. That combination is what will, will help compost them. The only time I would mulch with grass clippings is if I had an absolutely perfect lawn with no weeds in it at all. So if I had a fescue lawn and it had been maintained with absolutely no weeds, those grass clippings are perfectly fine as mulch. I could put them in my vegetable garden in the rows in between them. I could put, you could use them for all kinds of things. But again, if you're bagging up a weedy lawn and then you take that material and you use it as mulch somewhere, you're going to be spreading weeds all over your garden. So, keep that in mind. It's great for the compost pile if it's full of weed seeds, and perfectly fine as mulch if it's perfectly clean. But see, then I have to ask the question, how is it that your lawn is weed free? Because if your lawn is weed free because you've been using a bunch of herbicides on it, be careful that you're transferring those herbicides over to your vegetable garden or other places. So I say, weed-free grass clippings can be used as mulch, but, ask yourself how, is a herbicide got applied within, 2 or 3 weeks before that, you may be transferring a herbicide into your, that could cause problems in other spaces. So keep that in mind. Let's see, those of you who chasing perfect lawns. Somebody has native and tropical milkweed planted in their garden, and they heard the tropical milkweed can be bad for monarchs, and wanted to know if they should pull out the tropical milkweed. So we have lots of native species of milkweed all over the country, and the monarchs take advantage of those. This time of year, you'll see the monarchs just buzzing around all the milkweeds, laying their eggs on them. I've got a South African variety out, and it was in the video this week on the driveway out there, and monarchs have been all over it this week. The tropical milkweed, which a lot of people think is native to the Caribbean islands. Actually, nobody knows where it actually, I don't think knows where it was actually came from originally. The problem with the tropical milkweed is it stays evergreen for much longer. So my Asclepias tuberosa, which is the closest looking one to the tropical milkweed, our native Asclepias tuberosa, you'll see it kind of fading in the garden this time of year. As the monarchs are doing their thing, the plant is already starting to decline a little bit. So those, during the caterpillar stage, that plant is already starting to go to sleep. So the caterpillars will just destroy the rest of it down to the ground, and then form their chrysalis. And the timing is right because that plant's going to sleep. They're supposed to migrate, okay? And the problem with the tropical milkweed is especially up in Oklahoma and Kansas and those places, it can stay evergreen much longer, and it changes their patterns, for their migration. And so that's the actual issue with it. There's a lot of writing about it. Again, I don't know that anybody knows 100% for sure that it actually is causing the problem. We do know there's a big drop in monarch butterflies, but a lot of that is the entire Midwest being row crop farmers. So much of the middle of our country is, just straight rows of corn and straight rows of soybeans and straight rows of things that, wheat and those kinds of things that aren't places for these. There's not a good corridor, for these, for monarchs and other things to make it back and forth, the migrating insects. So could it be some tropical milkweed causing a problem? Maybe, I don't know. But again, there's a lot written about it, and I probably wouldn't have it in my garden, just because of that reason. Let's see. So somebody had a camellia that got really cold damaged last winter, and it didn't end up blooming. The buds are still on it, the brown buds from last year. Should they remove them? No, you don't really need to remove them. It'll eventually pop them off. You can go through and thump them off if you wanted to, but I don't think it's going to cause any real issue other than being unsightly. Here's another hydrangea paniculata question. Somebody wants to move a 3-year-old limelight hydrangea. You can do it in the dead of the winter. Cut the thing in half. I would just literally cut it in half, pop it out of the ground and move it, and it will come back like a storm next spring. I only wrote this one down because somebody was talking about they have a raised bed, and I got some guy working on a roof back here. You might be able to hear in the microphone. They've planted some soft caress mahonia and some Nyrohera mahonia and Marvel mahonia, and they've only hit soft caress and Nyrohera didn't, died for whatever reason. But just in their question, the only reason I wrote this down is they said they had planted them in raised beds with perlite and sand being added to them, and they had died. And the only reason it doesn't have anything to do with the mahonia or what you planted. I'm only writing this question down because you may be over-amending things and overdoing things just in general. If you're adding perlite to your soil and you're adding sand to your soil and you're growing things in raised beds, you may be overdoing in general. Most of us have native soil that's just fine, and most of these tougher ornamental plants don't mind going directly in your native soil. You'll see me amend some. I'll add some compost here or there. I'll add a lot of the things I show off on this channel are to show you how minimal I actually do anything. So when I'll put up a fertilizer video every February to show you how little I actually fertilize, which is, two bags of fertilizer once a year, and then I'll come back and fertilize a few containers later in the season, and that's it. None of these annuals in these borders have been refertilized this season, and they're all very vigorous. And then, I talk about watering, but I'll talk about how little I'm actually trying to water. I've had to water a little more late this summer than normal. But you're not seeing me add perlite. You're not seeing me. I'm not trying to perfect this soil. I added a lot of organic material to the top just to kind of recreate the forest floor, but I didn't drill it down into the ground. A little bit of it gets mixed into the ground when I dig a hole because, it's just sitting on top. And when the process of actually digging the soil out mixes some of that organic material in, but I'm not adding anything additional when I'm planting. So again, I only wrote this down. Just be careful. You can do too much it's easy to do too much of a good thing when we're gardening and to overdo. Okay, and then last thing for this week, there were a couple people that said on the question, on the before and after videos that they liked that I was making all these positive comments about these gardens, despite the fact that they figured I would have done something different. One thing I would like to say here is that we have, especially in my area here in Zone 7B, I think there's 9,000 taxa or different types of plants at the Ralston Arboretum. I think there's 30-some thousand at Juniper Level Botanic Garden here in Raleigh. There's a lot of available plants for us to grow and to mix together in our gardens, and no two gardens are ever going to look alike. No two homeowners are going to have the same intentions with their gardens. Some of you are, people that would like to stay at home and create an oasis, that you can come home to and see hummingbirds and pollinators and birds and, hear nature in the background, as you can probably hear in this audio right now. And then there's folks who just are trying to check the checkbox of, I need these plants to look good 12 months out of the year around my foundation, but I really don't have time or want or desire to be out there maintaining it all the time. And then there's all kinds of variations in between, right? There's people who want to entertain, so they want big entertainment spaces with a swimming pool and, big seating areas and, a grill and a fireplace and all kinds of things. So, I'll always make positive comments no matter what, because I landscaped for years, and part of that landscape installation is interviewing the customer. And it was part of my Learn to Garden series. It's like one of the first videos is ask yourself what kind of gardener you are. Don't try to copy somebody's YouTube channel knowing that you don't want to spend every weekend or an evening once a week weeding a garden or pruning things back or being in that. So, ask yourself who you are, how much do you want to garden? How much do you want to be out there? And then go according to that, and not somebody else's vision. It's your vision. What is your vision? And so I'm always going to I'm making positive comments because they did the thing that's made them happy in their space. And that makes me happy, watching it, because this is the thing that they're proud of and that they wanted to, they come home to at night, and they enjoy in their garden. And so, keep that in mind as you're looking at these photos from people's gardens. This is the thing that made them happy, okay? And it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be the thing that you would do, because it's not the thing that you would do. There's 30,000 different plants that I could combine together into this space, or 3 different plants I could combine into this space if that's all I wanted and all the maintenance that I wanted to do. So thank you guys for following along, asking great questions every week. And again, ask gardening questions down below, and I'll be back next Sunday with another one.